in a forest in the remote southwest of Ethiopia. These people are seeing television for the first time. They're the Mursi, and the program they're watching is about their own lives. Over the past decade, we've made 3 films with the Mursi. Now they're seeing something of these films and retracing their journey of the past 10 years. The Mursi's extraordinary story over those years has never reached the world's headlines about Ethiopia's terrible famine. But since our first film in 1974, the Mursi have been driven by the worst drought and famine in living memory to an increasing contact with the outside world. For them, it has been part of a long journey in search of cool ground. This is Berka, a village in the highlands of southern Ethiopia, without roads or electricity. But twice a week, the market comes to Berka. For the Mursi, this market is changing their lives. In the 1980s, their search for cool ground has brought the Mursi into regular contact with the outside world for the first time. A mass migration has brought nearly a quarter of the Mursi people to a new homeland in the Margot Valley, just a few hours' walk from here. For 1,000 Mursi, their new home promises relief from drought and hunger. But as their reliance on this market grows, life for the Mursi who have moved to the Mago Valley is beginning to shift away from patterns established over thousands of years towards the life of modern Ethiopia. Anthropologist David Turton has worked in Mursi country since 1968. He has seen the impact of the recent Mursi reliance on Berka.
This, for the Mursi, is something quite new, a dramatically new development since 1974, when the first film was made. It's making those Mursi who are now living in the Margot Valley part of the highland market economy.
But Turton also sees this market and the migration as part of a larger theme.
As far as the Mago migration is concerned, we have been able to get as close as possible to observing a process of transition from one kind of economy, one kind of society, really, to another. They have emerged from a situation in which they hardly knew that Ethiopia existed to become aware of their position within Ethiopia and to become more and more a part of Ethiopia.
Despite their growing connections with the outside world, the Mursi's new homeland remains a remote place. When the migrants came here, this was unoccupied wilderness. Along the valley of the Mago River, the 1,000 Mursi who made the trek in search of this cooler ground have hacked out a living. The scorched East African landscape of Ethiopia has become grimly familiar across the world since the late 1970s. But the territory of the Mursi lies hundreds of miles south of the highland famine areas in Ethiopia's greener lowlands. In the far southwest, the 5,000 Mursi have lived in isolation, hemmed in by mountains and one of Africa's great rivers, the Omo. In their traditional lands along the Omo, the Mursi found life increasingly tough in the drought years of the late 70s. Finally, in 1980, driven by starvation, nearly 1/4 of the entire population set out on a desperate exodus to higher ground some 50 miles to the east. By January 1982, when we flew over this area after our second film in Mursi country, we found the migrants gathered together in an extraordinary defensive settlement. Quite unlike the traditional scatter of temporary houses, it was a vivid indication of the migrants' insecurity in their new home. Today, there's no sign of the big settlement. With gathering assurance, the Mago Mursi have moved out into their new territory and made it their own.
Perhaps the migrants now feel that they are well established here and that therefore they don't need to huddle together, as it were, in a large settlement. So over the last 2 years, they have spread out and laid about themselves, clearing large areas for cultivation, and fortunately for them, this year the rains have continued long enough for it to be pretty certain now that they will get a good harvest in June. Given the attractiveness of this area for the migrants, one might ask why they didn't move here before. And the reason is that there is a cost, a very high cost that is involved in this migration.
The new settlement at Madadari is a crucial symbol for the migrants. It's the one place where they hope to be able to reconcile their migration with the fact that the tsetse fly is far more dangerous in the forested Margot Valley than in the traditional Mursi grazing areas they've left behind. But on the high open spaces here, they're gambling on preserving their cattle and their identity. Komrakora, the Mursi priest, keeps cattle here at Madadari, and he's a key figure in the changing life of the Mursi. He was one of the early migrants, and his example was decisive in legitimizing the exodus. During our first film in 1974, we saw how the Mursi united round Komrakora as they were rocked by a disastrous war. Now, as the embodiment of traditional Mursi values, he must try to affirm the old ways in the midst of rapid change.
The priest is seen as being a kind of guarantee that all will be well, because it is considered that his presence in the community will assure its well-being. In particular, it is felt, or at least hoped, that the priest's ritual powers will help to make the tsetse fly less harmful to the cattle. The irony is that by moving to this area, by putting their cattle at risk in this way, the migrants have done something which is unthinkable from the point of view of traditional Mursi values, those values being so fundamentally based upon cattle herding.
Taking blood from a cow is a vital bonus in hungry times. It looks alarming to us, but the cow is too valuable to the Mursi for them to risk harming it. Cattle provide milk, meat and blood for hungry people. They provide bride wealth for marriage, but they also provide the Mursi with their deepest convictions and pride about who they are. Here in the Margot Valley, the Tsetse challenge and sleeping sickness will inevitably make life impossible for the Mursi cattle, but the migrants have not yet accepted the cost of their move.
So betewa ora nanu ha heta ko landin ngaba bete heta ko landin ha tewa ora nanu biore heda chali na refias komoru abarari na kita anina na dikosuna oyalo senganga.
But the migrants are also pinning their hopes on less traditional remedies. They believe that anti-sleeping sickness drugs bought in the highland villages will enable them to keep their cattle and their Mursi identity. The Mursi faith in modern cattle drugs is a tragic delusion. The inevitable unskilled inoculation with weak dosages of the expensive serum will merely produce resistant strains of the parasite. It seems certain that the miraculous solution to their dilemma the Mago Mursi hope to get from the outside world will in fact accelerate the death of their cattle and their way of life. Half an hour's walk away from the cattle at Madadari, on lower ground along the Banco River, is the priests' cultivation area. Just a few days ago, the sorghum here was flourishing and promised a good harvest. Now, the crop is ruined.
Kurdana. Kurdana, ano. Liwagang.
For the priest's settlement, the attack by the armyworm means months of hunger unless the people here can quickly establish another crop. The worm also challenges the priest's ritual powers. Two hours walk away to the south in the cultivation areas along the Mago River, it's not yet too late. The armyworm is in the area, but it hasn't done much damage so far. There's still time for the Mursi who live and cultivate here to do something. In the debating area near the river, men have gathered for an emergency discussion about how to tackle the threat of the armyworm.
Two things are going on, at least. Firstly, they are attempting to reach a decision about the ritual that ought to be performed to protect the sorghum in this area from the ravages of the armyworm. And the essential matter to be decided is who is going to perform the ritual, who would be the right person. They're not only expressing publicly their concern about the situation, they're not only making a public choice of who will perform the ritual, they are also using this occasion to describe, for the benefit of all present, what steps were taken on similar occasions in the past. And of course, in a society where there are no written records, this handing on by word of mouth of tradition is absolutely vital. It is considered that the Chai, who live over towards the Sudan, are particularly expert in dealing ritually with the army worm. And the decision they made was to call upon Miradoa, who lives here and is of Chachi origin. I suspect that everyone knew that he was going to be asked to do it, but nevertheless it was necessary to reach a public agreement about this, because he was going to be asked to do the ritual on behalf of the community. So this was the community publicly and unanimously asking him to do it. He doesn't accept the invitation with alacrity, but this is a conventional response amongst the Mursi of those credited with supernatural powers when asked to make use of their powers on behalf of the community.
In his cultivation area, Miradoa begins the ritual to banish the army worm. Miradoa seals the mouth of an army worm with fat before he commands them to go.
The smoke is said by the Mursi to attract the attention of Tumwi. Tumwi is a Mursi word which we can translate as God, but it also refers to the sky. Tumwi is the source of rain and therefore the source of life.
Ani na kokongi. Belomai. Akurdai. Ala. Ala ogyalo eh. Mami aboy nuine. Wang na oktuma. What?
At a settlement near the Mago River, a healing is in progress. Ulikoro Bedameri seems to be suffering from mumps, but he has concluded that his illness results from the evil influence of an unknown enemy who has invaded his body with dangerous objects.
It is believed by Bedameri that small black flying insects known as busso have been introduced into his body, and Ngajare Holi, the healer, is a specialist in dealing with these particular objects. The technique itself is worldwide in its occurrence. The healer sitting behind the patient and using his or her hands in a kind of soothing, massaging movement. Ngajare Holi showed us one of these small black insects so that there was some evidence that she had actually done the job. She is not, of course, actually extracting these things from his body. There is obvious subterfuge here. But on the other hand, there is no doubt that the technique is successful. Bedameri was better afterwards, not because, as far as we could see, his mumps had been dealt with, but he felt much better. He must have been in a better state to withstand and fight his illness than he was before.
Mursi healers like Ngajare Holi are always women. At her settlement here, 7 of her relatives, all of them women, live and work together. Men appear to play little part in the daily life here. The work of the settlement is in the hands of women, like Ngajare Holi's sister-in-law, Naluhu.
Aligere.
Judging from what women have told us, they see themselves as working, if not harder than men, they see themselves as working continuously on a daily basis and having much less leisure time than men. Women are on the go throughout the year with various tasks.
Naluhu's non-stop activity provides striking confirmation of how Mursi women work.
They recognize that they are contributing more, certainly on a regular basis, than men are in terms of effort. But they do not go on from that to say we are being exploited.
Tesekia.
Tesekia. Zuanga atitelakia. Zua mai elbarijina ahanga tesekia.
Ngada tesekia. Na desina no go. Na ugo go sire. Ya agersi.
Hotel.
Agersi.
Kayu tuli agersi kayu.
Na hira ma age. Hira fuma ma. Ora kaman agani. Kedesia hon kongi hen zuanga ha. Oginya hano. Ogina no. Ogina no.
The migration will inevitably change the lives of women. Traditionally, they have looked after cultivation while men herded the cattle. And in the past, men have had most contact with the outside world, buying and selling cattle and rifles in the highland villages. For the Mago migrants, the closeness of Berka market and the loss of their cattle is shifting those traditional roles.
It's now the women migrants who are the most frequent visitors to Berka, buying grain and other foodstuffs when they are hungry and selling grain when they have a surplus. So when we say that the migrants are getting involved for the first time on a regular basis in the cash economy of the highlands, we're really talking about women. It's the women migrants who are at the sharp end of this new development.
One striking result of women's increasing contact with the outside world is a new debate about whether to cut their lips.
Nanga medu done gina sige loga dergui na tuinga dune uli se kudunu te suga kantia agi ina na bikingi kokongi ana dune tuinga agi hulu dunu nga bikingi kokonga dune nga chalihang.
For Mursi men, things are also changing. These men are preparing for a duel to settle a dispute. It's a traditional part of men's lives to respond to disputes through dueling. But in other ways, life for men who've moved here is shifting from familiar patterns. 50 miles away, back in the traditional Mursi lands close to the River Omo, men can still carry on lives shaped by a close involvement with cattle. For the Mago migrants, the tsetse fly is making this image of a man's life impossible. And as women find their new power, buying and selling grain in Berka market, men may respond by seeking a new role.
As men lose their traditional role as cattle herders, they will presumably take more of an interest in cultivation and in the buying and selling of grain. So women could become more, not less, economically dependent on men.
But already a few Mursi men have found another kind of new life. For 4 years, Uli Kuri was a soldier with the Ethiopian army. Now he's joined the migrants in the Margot Valley.
Asmara Sudan Harakari nga bayan nga abana tu be ti dode nga kanu do neni ana kuninga.
Uli Kuri was wounded and invalided out of the army. He came home to Mursi country and married Kelithi. He also brought back mementos of his campaigns.
Kunana Madala Tua kuchumba ya Madala Urgi.
Uli Kuri's identity card allows him free medical care and unrestricted travel. He sees change for the Mursi as inevitable.
Dammi hali elna hali hale Garcia Heike kuchumba Ula Kenya ko Gilip Nyanga
After a 2-day walk from his home back in the traditional Mursi grazing lands 50 miles away, Uli Chagi has arrived for a visit to the Margot Valley. He's here to see relatives and to renew his acquaintance with David Turton and the film crew he met in 1974. 11 years ago, we filmed Uli Chagi debating in time of war. Since then, his life has reflected the Mursi's hard years and the pressures that led to the migration. As the rains failed in the late 70s, Uli Chagi moved constantly in search of a decent harvest, struggling to feed his growing family. Finally, in 1981, Uli Chagi joined the mass migration and moved here to the Mago. But in 1983, he moved back again to the traditional Mursi lands. Darchu is another visitor from the traditional Mursi lands along the River Omo. When we filmed with him in 1982, Darchu was living at the Omo as a member of a minority people, the Kwegu. We saw how Darchu and the Kwegu were dominated by the Mursi, providing river ferrying and hunting services for their Mursi patrons. But despite strong urging from his patron, the Mursi priest, Darchu has refused to join the migration. He insists that the Kwegu will always stay at the Omo. But even there, Darchu told us about stirrings of change. Bridges and bulldozers are beginning to seek a way through the wilderness we filmed in 1982. And Darchu told us of new visitors.
Hine ahagwanya tanno nangi thane na hon irese dindili yonga awli tebono ta katallo goro katallo aje duru ngani hena gunya nani kiwana duru na faje hirabu kukumuru ya holi so bebe ba ma ya hon gunya na henga ja irese chukara ni kala moy wona ngabi me ngana hon na hon gego hay gunya nga hine hon doenga henga misal hina ngaha gunya aha gashu niusi kirinu ngorana ko gonyon se kiwe ke bio nizo iwo nanga koi
ai haranci ya giya hoyni gunni hu nga eje gunni hu
gunya kare ba eja turei nga eje gunya kare jene fotonya jene.
The highland village of Berka is the front line of another world. Christianity, like commerce, begins in Berka. Tomorrow is Easter Sunday, and this morning Coptic priests are collecting alms. For the Mago migrants, this other world is suddenly closer than their traditional land in the Omo Valley. By 9 o'clock on this Saturday morning, Mursi are already arriving in Berka at the end of a 4-hour slog from the Margot Valley, more than 4,000 feet below here. Despite their increasing contact, the Mursi are still outsiders here, regarded with suspicion and fear by the Ari people who live around Berka. In the hungry weeks before their harvest, the Mago Mursi rely heavily on Berka market.
proximity to this market is absolutely essential as far as the Mursi are concerned in explaining why they moved here. Now, being within a short distance of the market means that people can go every week, they can take something small like a bundle of firewood or a gourd of honey, sell it in the market and buy a small quantity of food, take this food back to their home in the Margot Valley and keep their family and especially their children going for another week or so. They are becoming dependent on the market in rather the same way that they used to be dependent on cattle as a means of seeing them through times of hardship.
Gazal. Jara. Nanga do ko wori he kamari hangani gagera he. Katanga gino huso. Agin nga gitale le agin nga. Ge. Ala legi. Hi agamu chuinga. Ka hula gin la lana tara gya nara.
Things that were once rare luxuries are becoming necessities, and salt is perhaps the best example of that. There's no doubt that the Mursi who have moved to the Mago are coming to look upon salt in their porridge as a necessity rather than a luxury.
The Mursi woman's angry insistence that she's been cheated by the Ari trader was a tactic to outsmart him. She'd already smuggled back one of her 10-cent pieces in the confusion. The Mursi have quickly learned to survive in the market, but their contact with the outside world has also become more official. Nyomani Ali is one of the Mursi who migrated to the Margot Valley. He also has a new job that tells something of how life is changing for him and for his people. Nyomani Ali has recently become a local official of Ethiopia's revolutionary government, chairman of the Mago Farmers Association.
It's very much a feature of the new government's program that people such as the Mursi should be brought in and incorporated into Ethiopia. And so the chairman of the Farmers Association has become a key figure as a result of that.
Today, the chairman makes requests for famine relief from the Ethiopian government. He also receives their directives. He's unable to read them, but he's well aware of his new responsibilities.
He is now called upon to actually, as it were, deliver the goods, and most noticeably in the payment of tax in money, which again they have never done before.
The chairman is also charged with maintaining law and order. One of his recent letters from the government asks him to look for cattle stolen by the Mursi from the Ari. But the migrants have also found their own ways to resolve their new problems of law and order. 2 years ago, tensions between Mursi and Ari came to a head over the issue of the honey barrels. Recently, the Mursi migrants have begun to harvest honey. But before they came, the trees here and their valuable honey belonged to the Ari.
When the Mursi moved in, they were extremely hungry, and they began to steal honey from the Ari honey barrels, not to eat it, but to take it up and sell it in Berka, and with the proceeds to buy food. As a result of this, relations between the Mursi and the Ari deteriorated sharply. Now the Ari, although they were unable to prevent the Mursi occupying this area, could, through the police, make it very difficult for the Mursi to use the market.
Faced with this crisis, the Mago Mursi worked out a remarkable solution. Uli Korobedameri learned to read and write 10 years ago in a highland prison, where he was held for alleged cattle theft. As the only literate Mursi, his talents were crucial to the solution of the crisis.
Le ato wole jar holi ato wole jar holi.
It was agreed by both sides that any Mursi going up to Berka with honey to sell must carry a letter. The letter would state on the authority of Komorakora that this man's honey had not been stolen from an Ari honey barrel, but had been gathered in the bush, and it would state where it had been gathered.
Bedameri inyani hira gai warkata huli hiri alon retete kuya na kaya inno ton warkatani ununga ave hira kilo ke seri maso ameno kogoino da warkata e kodane dhuuni inyowuni no kokto huli hiri warkata ninge maktabwe chebe angangaso lo abe yo komuro
It certainly succeeded in the sense that it got over the immediate problem. It enabled relations between the Mursi and the Ari to settle down at a time in which the situation looked pretty difficult.
Today, the Ari have moved their honey barrels back into their own home territory. For the time being, a watchful truce exists with the Mursi. 2 weeks after he performed the ritual to drive the armyworm from his cultivation area, Miradoa has reason for satisfaction. The armyworm is gone and his sorghum is flourishing.
Una broga kibananga ana kibana kolo hunga mehe nanga ukuri una broga kelanga na kara mushinga agya broki kibananga hunga nanga mehe ha ukutani hey bihung hey bihung ne ka lok ti gunyu.
But while the sorghum in Miradoa's area is prospering after heavy rain, elsewhere things are less happy. The priest's crop at Banco remains devastated. In their new home, the Mago Mursi look for a new solution. An Ethiopian army helicopter arrives to take the film crew back to Addis Ababa. The chairman has asked if we'll also take him and a small Mursi delegation to Jinka, the nearest town with Ethiopian government officials. The chairman and his delegation hope to plead their case for relief grain to help the people who've lost their crop to the armyworm. For the Mursi, Jinka is where the modern Ethiopia of government and officialdom begins. It remains a remote place. Ours was the first flight to land here in 6 years, and Jinka had just been cut off by violent rains. For the chairman, there's unwelcome news. Chief Administrator Sehai is away in the provincial capital, but tomorrow the Mursi still hope to put their case for relief to an official.
እኛ እህሉ የተዘራነው እንትኑ ያው እንግዲህ ምናምን ጤል በልቷል
እና ሆዴቡ
ራብ ነው
ሚያና ባሪኩኒnga
ትላንትና የመጣው ጉዳይ ይሄ ነው።
ሚያ ሁሌ ሳይጓድ ባሪ ጋራቡ ይኛnga ማጊጉኒ ይጎno
ጓድ ፀሐይ ስለሄደ አንተ ያው ምትክል ነው እንዴት ነው
ኢሩ ጋራ
ያው ልጆች ያው የሞተ ነው
ሆያ ክሪዱno ሁሌ ረታኔ ቦይሸnga አቻሊ
With the ex-soldier Uli Kuri interpreting, the chairman vividly describes the migrants' hunger. In reply, the official insists that the government has always tried to help the Mursi to settle in one place so that they can receive education and make progress. But there is a problem.
ነገር ግን ከመጀመሪያው የወረሳችሁትን ድሮ ያቆያችሁትን የማይጠቅም ባህል አንለቅም በማለታችሁ የከፍት ጭራ እየተከታተላችሁ ከቦታ ቦታ ስትዞሩ በመኖራችሁ ለችግር እየተጋለጣችሁ ይሄ ከመጀመሪያው የራሳችሁ አቀማመጥ አሰፋፈር ኋላ ቀር ባህል በድሏችኋል
The official tells the Mursi they should have reported the problem of the armyworm earlier. Then the authorities could have done something. For the time being, with the roads muddy and impassable, they can't send relief as they had some months ago. The Mursi face a long walk home. For us, a flight to meet the senior man responsible for this area, and for the Mursi, Sehai Alemayu. He's aware of the Mago migration.
We don't agree with them if they are going to destroy, the wildlife and the reserved forests. So we advise them and orient them, to use the fertile land out of Mago Park. I think with the Mursi people, the solution is to settle them, I think that will be the best. Because when you settle the nomads, everything will be accessible, you can give education, you can organize them, you can teach them the modern way of farming, the way they have to lead the better life, everything. So the solution will be the settlement program. They have not to go throughout their life all walking, searching a grass.
For the Mursi migrants watching the television record of their lives over the past decade, the government's plans for change are still rumours from far away. For now, the story of their recent past is more arresting. And the novelty of television is more startling, at least for a moment.
They were astonished, amazed, fascinated, but I don't think it was something which they continued to think about or even talk about much after it had happened. It would be difficult to imagine anything further removed from their daily lives than a television. They did see these films as the result of what we had been doing in 1974 and 1982. They saw them as documents preserving something of their way of life and customs. And since the Mursi are as aware as we are that their society is undergoing change, they recognize the value of these films as historical documents. One of them said, one could use this to teach our children about our history, about our traditions.
We showed the programs again for people who had been specially involved with the filming. The priest watched himself in 1974 performing rituals to strengthen the Mursi in their war with the Bodhi. But our three films can only sketch in the Mursi story over what for them has been a decade of unprecedented change. In 1974, they were barely aware of Ethiopia, still less of Africa. Today, the government plans their future in a new place, and their land is reserved as a national park for wildlife and tourism. But after his years with the Mursi, David Turton sees beyond war and migration a larger pattern in their long search for cool ground.
I think if we really stand back, we can see a very broad movement of people, a movement which goes beyond the present Mursi and Bodhi in both space and time. Mursi identity has been created and maintained by this movement of people. A journey of enormous proportions, I mean a journey involving people over many, many generations, people who were not Mursi, but a journey of cattle herding people in the general direction of the Ethiopian highlands, which gave rise to many different ethnic groups of which the Mursi are one.
They, of course, see themselves as having made a journey in search of cool ground. But in a way, it's more accurate to say that a journey has made them.